I think I have found the first gem of my NFL scouting for the 2026 draft. We're going to start today with Lander Barton. Hopefully, we get a couple of hundred of these done before the draft actually begins in April. We have just about 100 days, so the clock is already ticking. I'm going to go over the strengths, weaknesses, what I think overall, and of course, at the end, we have to give a grade in comparison as well. So Lander Barton, linebacker from Utah. Let's first talk about the strengths that I saw pop off on tape. For starters, this guy has a pro-level pedigree. Both of his brothers are older than him, played at Utah. They all went obviously to the same high school. Cody and Jackson have now been in the NFL for, I believe, 7+ seasons. Both were taken either in the 2018 or 2019 draft. And Lander plays the exact same position as his older brother, Cody, who is also a linebacker in the NFL, has been bouncing around a few teams, played for the Seahawks for the first few years of his career, then went to Denver, and now he's in Tennessee. So this guy has got it in his veins. He is pumping with NFL-type talent. He's 6'5", about 230 pounds. So the size and stature there are pretty much NFL caliber. Now, let's talk about what I saw on the field. This guy can handle open space better than the majority of linebackers in college football. And with the growth of the NFL pass game, I think that is something that you have to excel at when you get to that level. He has great vertical speed, not to mention secondarily going into this third advantageous strength is his hip flexibility is through the roof. First, I'm going to talk about with coverage. He can flip the field pretty easily, or flip his hips on the field pretty easily in coverage. I saw that a lot on tape. Specifically, I want to talk about the interception against Kansas State to win that game. That was a nuts game, by the way. 51-47, sealed with an interception here from Barton. He was able to come from the middle of the field, read the quarterback's eyes, flip his hips, and get in front of the football before anyone else could. That's the type of player that he is. A lot of his stuff is built off of pure instincts and his ability to put himself in positions to succeed. Really, I'm going to talk about this as a part of his weaknesses, and I really don't think this is a general knock against him. The position that Utah put him in was a very difficult one. You have to be a hyper athlete in this middle linebacker position of the Utah scheme because you're expected to be kind of a safety valve. Once again, I'll get to that in just a little bit, but Barton was able to do that at an extremely high level. He started off hot. He was the 2022 Pac-12 Freshman Defensive Player of the Year, second team freshman All-American. He's accumulated over 200 tackles in his career, and let's talk about those tackles. I think his fits are pretty solid, to say the least. He's got good handwork, his hip flexibility. Once again, this is the secondary part that I want to talk about, his hip placement, the way that he's able to make contact and then drive through his hips when making that contact is something that you usually do not see from linebackers early on. That is something that gets developed as years go on through experience, through practice and reps. And he does it pretty fluid, and it's also rare for somebody that's as tall as he is. Most NFL linebackers are somewhere in the 6 foot to 6'2" range. At 6'5", you almost expect him to try to bear down on opposing offensive players, but he has a pretty good pad level. Once again, kind of difficult with a 6'5" frame. But what is so good about his game is that his flexibility through his hips allows him to make contact with his chest and then use his hips to explode through. His feet drive as well. He gets a lot of movement, or maybe even lack thereof, from the opposing offensive players that he's trying to tackle. He doesn't have a lot of tackles broken on him either. So I think holistically as a linebacker, this is almost as solid of a prospect as you can get. But of course, with every NFL player, it doesn't matter if it's the number 1 pick in the draft or the last pick in the draft. There are always some weaknesses. So let's talk about it. In general, right, comparatively to his hips and the strengths and how many different parts of the game that plays into, I think his weight has a lot of things, or specifically muscle mass, right? It plays a lot into the disadvantages of his game. Now, that being said, let me clarify with this guy has the frame to add the muscle mass that he needs to succeed at a high level, specifically the pro level. But already coming into this, he doesn't really have the weight that it takes to be an NFL middle linebacker. I think of guys like Bobby Wagner, that traditional big meat size. You just don't really see that often when you have players that have just really succeeded with their athletic ability. And that's what Barton has done over his college career. So, all that being said, putting on muscle mass is going to be one of the keys for Barton going into this. Like I said, Bobby Wagner, I believe, is 6 foot 243. This guy's 6'5", 230. Now, not everybody can be Bobby Wagner. And also, another thing is you don't want to add too much weight that it takes advantage or takes away some of the advantages that you have in your college game. For example, Barton thrives off of athleticism. Not necessarily twitchiness, but more of a downhill speed. If he adds too much weight, that'll take away from it. So I think adding an appropriate amount of muscle mass will be good. Now, that being said, looking at the weaknesses, that lack of muscle mass and weight causes him to be kind of a non-factor in a lot of inside zone run plays. He doesn't fit the run very well, and it just has to do with the fact that if an interior offensive lineman that is probably about 6'1", 6'2", maybe even 6 foot, 290, 300 pounds, if they get their hands on him, it's really hard for him to disengage. I've seen several plays in the tape where he flat out just gets moved out of the hole. Now, with Utah's defense, they are one of the best in the country over these last 4 years. So there's not a ton of explosive plays that you can blame on Barton, but putting him into an NFL caliber defense and then having them play other NFL players on the offensive side of the football, you absolutely can see where that will be a problem. Now, secondarily, with this, I'm going to talk more about this role in the Utah defense. The middle linebacker position in general is not one that rushes the passer a ton and or drops back deep in coverage a lot, right? So there's limited experience in those roles and not a lot of opportunity for Barton to show off his versatility, which I actually think is a strength of his. He even played tight end for Utah at times over the last couple seasons. So I think the versatility that he has to his game is exponential. However, what we don't see is a lot of experience with that. He doesn't get his name called on a lot of blitzes. There are often not mid blitzes that are called for him, but it's more for him to take up blockers rather than for him to actually get to the quarterback. Looking at the production that he's had as a pass rusher, it's really been just because of other elite players on the defense making plays and forcing quarterbacks into his hands. Specifically, I saw a couple of those this season versus, I believe, Arizona and BYU. I could be wrong about that, but I do believe that there are several plays where he has a recorded sack, but I don't necessarily think that the quote-unquote sack was created by him, if that makes sense. Now, secondarily, because he doesn't get called on a lot of blitzes, there's not a ton of tape where he blows up plays in the backfield. Looking back at the top 100 tackle for loss leaders in the country over the last 4 years, Barton does not crack that list in any of the seasons. But once again, not only does his position not really have those stats, but neither does his role in this Utah defense. He is more of the anchor for the first two levels, the front seven per se. And so I think he's done that at a high level, but like I said, kind of boxes him into a corner in terms of showing off his versatility. I definitely think he can do that either on the whiteboard and or at the combine. If he can get there and show off his athletic ability, I think he'll start to shoot up some of the draft boards there in the NFL. Now, let's go ahead and get into the overall thoughts on him. Overall, I think he brings a combination of speed and body fluidity. It's really hard to connect the two when you have players that either rely on their speed too much and or rely on their size. I think he's a really good combination of both of those things. He has great instincts. There's a lot of plays that you can see that he just knows where he needs to be on the field. It's not necessarily about scheme, play call. It's just him 4 or 5 seconds into the play going to make a play. There's hardly any tape where you don't see him flying to the football. I don't doubt with his will and ability and NFL pedigree from all of his brothers making it into the league that he's going to find a way onto the football field. I don't doubt that at all. The question is whether or not I believe he can be an NFL starter, Pro Bowler, Hall of Famer, whatever. What will be his role in the NFL? So let's get in and talk about the grading system. So these are the way that I grade things on a scale of 1 to 10. 1 to 3 is a practice squad level player, a guy who will never really see serious action on the film, might be a preseason hero, but when it comes to the regular season, he is prepping for other teams rather than prepping for his own. 3 to 5 is a rotational player. This is a guy who can actually have a pretty successful and lucrative career, but will never make it into that starting caliber. 5 to 7 is a 3+ year starter. When I think of 5 to 7, I'm thinking of a guy like Will Compton, who has done it at a very high level, but never really reached that perennial Pro Bowl caliber player. 7 to 9 and or 9 to 10, which is a first ballot Hall of Fame caliber type player. You really only see maybe 3 or 4 of them in a draft. And that is, honestly, you might not even see 1 to 2 when it comes to the grading. So where do I have Lander Barton graded and what's my player comparison? Well, let's get right into it. My grade is a 6.1 out of 10. I absolutely think that Barton will be a starter in this league. The question is for how long? Cody Barton, his brother, who is my player comparison for him, has made quite a niche in the NFL. He's accrued over 500 tackles in his 7 seasons so far. Had a pretty good year with the Titans. He hasn't really had a ton of spotlight put on him. That being said, I think the same is going to be said for Lander Barton. This is a guy who will continue to put his effort on the field, and it's going to show, especially given the fact that he has this size and athletic ability that it's really hard to replicate if you don't naturally have it. So Lander Barton absolutely belongs in this draft class. As a 4th or 5th round pick, I absolutely think that's a steal. I would go as far to say as I would draft him in the 2nd round. I know that's saying a lot, but I think of another guy like Nick Bolton, who at first was a high volume tackler, but then looking at the Super Bowl and the plays that he was able to make in that versus the San Francisco 49ers, that's the type of player that I think Barton has the potential to transition into, but that is going to be a few years down the road. He needs some more time to develop some versatility in his defensive game and or adding that muscle mass. So 6.1 out of 10 is my grade for him. This is absolutely a gem in the draft. Let me know other players you want me to cover this NFL offseason. I am trying to do as many as humanly possible, but a lot goes into these. I've been scouting now for the past couple months. I did 75 players last year. I'm going to try to do at least 200, but we'll see where we get. Thank you guys so much for watching. Be sure to tune into all of our other content. Thank you again. See you next time.